while we were being distracted by the young lady and her childish, being as she was a child, antics, some shit popped off yesterday. Yeah, let's get into it. Sex toys, a corrupt police chief, and a DA found guilty, okay? A jury found former Suffolk County District Attorney Thomas Spota guilty of obstructing a federal civil rights investigation, the latest in Long Island's proud tradition of corrupt officials. The verdict brings to a close a 7-year saga that involves sex toys, cover-ups, beatings, and political machinations. The case was confusing to follow, having spanned nearly a decade, 2 investigations, 2 trials, and Suffolk's web of political intrigue. Spota's legal troubles began with former Suffolk County Police Chief of Department James Burke, who pleaded guilty to beating a suspect in 2012 and then trying to orchestrate a cover-up. Christopher Loeb, the suspect at the heart of the trial, had stolen a duffel bag, remember that, out of Burke's car, which contained sex toys and pornography. Burke assaulted Loeb while Loeb was in custody. Burke had been set off by Loeb calling him a pervert. That stuck out in my mind. We're going to keep going, though. Remember that.
After he was arrested for stealing a duffel bag out of the chief's unmarked SUV. The bag contained the chief's police gear, sex toys, and pornography, according to Loeb. Once he was arrested, witnesses have told federal investigators the chief oversaw a torturous beatdown.
They chained me to the floor for 10 hours and beat me, assaulted me. I could barely lift my neck. That's how low I was to the ground. Every time I asked for a lawyer, I got hit again, I got choked, I got punched, I got slapped, I got kicked.
Although federal prosecutors opened a civil rights investigation into an incident in 2013, it initially went nowhere. Burke admitted to attempting to prevent members of law enforcement from cooperating with investigators during the original probe. However, the probe reopened in 2015, prompting Burke to resign and finally plead guilty to civil rights violations for beating Loeb and conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice in 2016. Burke's lawyer said the police chief realized what he did and he was very remorseful. A judge sentenced Burke to 46 months in prison. Remember that, he only got 46 months. Several officers pled guilty to obstruction as well. 2015 probe also turned its attention to the Suffolk District Attorney's Office and began to investigate its members' roles in the original cover-up. Spota and his aide, Christopher McPartland, Division Chief of Investigations, were indicted in 2017. Burke and Spota's relationship spans decades, which could explain why the former district attorney put his neck on the line to help in the cover-up. Honey, it was more than that. And my melanin was tingling about it, okay? But we're going to keep going. The pair first met in 1979 when Burke was a teenage witness, the police chief, in a high-profile murder case that Spota was trying. He continued as a mentor to Burke throughout his police career, hiring him as an investigator in the district attorney's office, and even recommending him to County Executive Steve Bellone for the Suffolk police chief position. The cover-up of Chief Burke's assault, witnesses at trial said, was part of a broader pattern. The testimony exposed an alarming culture of corruption and retribution in a county with about 2,500 police officers, one of the largest police departments in the United States. Police officers who were supposed to investigate gangs and school shootings would be diverted to help their chief with petty vendettas and mundane tasks, possibly because there were no shootings or gangs. Anyway, like spying on his girlfriends or driving him to the airport, former officers testified. Together, Mr. Spota and Mr. McPartland and Chief Burke controlled what amounted to law enforcement's fiefdom in eastern half of Long Island, prosecutors said. The 3 men called themselves the administration. One former police officer testified they golfed together and drank together. Mr. McPartland and Mr. Burke used to greet one another on the phone with a vulgar imprecation. Mr. Burke's relationship with Mr. Spota began in 1979 when Mr. Spota was a young prosecutor trying a murder case, and Mr. Burke, then a teenager, was his star witness. Mr. Burke later became a police officer. In the 1990s, an internal investigation found that he had violated several police protocols, including having sex in his patrol car while in uniform with a prostitute who used crack cocaine. Mr. Spota, a lawyer for the police union at the time, defended Mr. Burke and negotiated a plea deal that saved his career. Not only saved his career, this motherfucker became police chief. Then in 2001, and Mr. Spota, who switched parties from Republican to Democrat, you see what I be telling y'all? It don't make no difference. They be flip-flopping and switching, hopping back and forth from parties. It don't matter. It's all the same. Then in 2001, Mr. Spota, who switched parties from Republican to Democrat, was elected district attorney. He repeatedly promoted Mr. Burke in the police department, consolidating their power. Prosecutors said the two of them, along with other officials, were able to punish people who challenged their authority. In particular, Mr. Burke hated one of the police officials, Pat Cuff, who had conducted the internal investigation against him in the 90s. Witnesses said when Mr. Cuff's son was caught with a gun, the district attorney's office threatened to upgrade the charges from a misdemeanor to a felony. These are white folks. Mr. Cuff cried at his desk, suspecting it was retaliation, a witness testified. As soon as Mr. Burke became police chief in early 2012, he demoted Mr. Cuff by 4 ranks and assigned him to guard a warehouse. To maintain the lie, Mr. Spota and Mr. McPartland relied heavily on Mr. Hickey, the police commander who supervised those 3 detectives. Mr. Hickey testified that he was ordered to instruct his men to deny. Mr. Spota and others involved in that cover-up handpicked one of the 3 officers, Anthony Leto, to lie under oath about the assault during the court hearing, Mr. Hickey said. Mr. Leto told jurors that he feared that if he was truthful, the police chief would falsely accuse his son of a crime or plant drugs on them. The extraction initially worked, thwarting federal agents for several months, but the investigation escalated again in 2015 with more subpoenas. During a meeting that year, Mr. McPartland speculated about who the rat was. Mr. Spota said that if one police officer cooperated, he'll never work here again, and I will see to it, according to Mr. Hickey's testimony. After the meeting, Chief Burke threatened that if the police detectives failed to stay in line, he would expose that Mr. Hickey was cheating on his wife, Mr. Hickey said. Taken right out of the FBI's handbook. I realized that my career was over, he testified, and that if I even tried to go to the feds at this point, I would be dead in Suffolk County. Mr. Hickey said that he stayed awake at night feeling paranoid. He was hospitalized in a stress-induced delirium and was screaming, biting, and spitting, according to medical records shown at trial. So he went through a fraction of what some of the things our people have gone through, and he ended up in a mental institution, in a hospital, in a stress-induced delirium, screaming, biting, and spitting. See, we are strong people. 4 days after his release from the hospital, October 2015, he received a grand jury subpoena, he said. Mr. Hickey decided to plead guilty in his role in the conspiracy and cooperated with prosecutors as their star witness, testifying on the stand for 3 days. Did anybody hear about this? Nope. Remember now, my question to the universe was, why was he so mad? Why did he whoop another white man's ass? Like, why was he so mad that he did that? Let's find out. Burke, meanwhile, allegedly began to attack Loeb when he called him a pedophile.
Me up, they were picking me up by the back of my arm, slamming me on the ground. They didn't tell me why I was being arrested. They didn't tell me why they were at my house. I had no idea what was going on. I was assuming it was for that duffel bag that I took out of the cap's car. When they brought me to the back, to my house, to the back door of my house, they were hitting me. When my mother walked in, they stopped hitting me. I got to the precinct. They handcuffed me to the floor. They chained me to the floor. When they came into the room, they were beating me up. Officer Leto, who I found out his name was Leto later on throughout the trial, he was choking me out. He told me he was going to rape my mother. When they all got up, they left the room. And that's when then Chief Burke started threatening me, hitting me. He's like, your family's done. I called Chief Burke a pedophile. He grabbed me by my cheeks. He's like, I'll kill you. He's flipping out.
Okay, now, next question. Why did he call him a pedophile? The stolen duffel bag contained sex toys. And according to an article, pornography that appeared to feature prepubescent boys. See, now this article is mad old. None of the new articles are saying this. None of them at all. Let's talk about the strippers. I mean, not the strippers, the prostitutes. Let's go back to the beginning of the article. Grace ex-police commissioner may be connected to sex workers murdered by Long Island serial killer over 20 years, attorney for slain escort says. Attorney for murdered escort says that former police commissioner may be connected to multiple sex workers killed in Long Island. Remember, he only got 46 months. The attorney for the family of a New Jersey escort who was strangled to death in 2010 said on Thursday that a disgraced police commissioner may have connections to 10 of the 17 women who are believed to have been murdered by a serial killer in Long Island. John Ray said that he believes that former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke should be investigated for his possible ties to these women before introducing a woman whom he claims she had a sexual encounter with the man. That woman, who asked to be identified as Leanne, claims that she was at a party 1 year after the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert when Burke choked her and forced her to perform rough oral sex on him before throwing several $100 bills at her and saying she was a bad, something with a W, I have no idea what that is, when he failed to reach climax. The incident occurred at a home in the same area where Gilbert disappeared, according to Leanne. I say it brings a direct connection between Burke and those poor dead victims lying along Ocean Parkway, said Ray, according to NBC New York. Ray said Burke attended parties with drugs and prostitution, and Leanne claims this is the police commissioner. She saw Burke grab a girl by the hair and drag her to the ground, according to the New York Post. On Thursday, Ray brought forth a woman who said Burke forced her to perform rough oral sex on him in the same area near where Gilbert went missing. Leanne said she made the decision to come forward at this time in hopes of helping the investigation. She also said that she realizes now she could have lost her life that night. That could have been my grave, and this is bigger than me, said Leanne. As head of the Suffolk County Police Department, Burke's jurisdiction included the tiny Long Island enclaves of Southampton and Montauk. Burke is currently behind bars on that short sentence after he orchestrated a cover-up when he and other officers beat a 26-year-old Christopher Loeb who had stolen a duffel bag of items from his car while he was in handcuffs. One of the men also allegedly told Loeb he was going to rape his mother, while another said he would make it appear as if he had fatally overdosed on heroin. Let me ask you guys a question. Don't we have a couple of Black Panther leaders who overdosed on drugs? Meanwhile, allegedly began to attack Loeb when he called him a pedophile. The stolen duffel bag contained sex toys and, according to the article, pornography that appeared to feature prepubescent boys. Burke ordered officials to lie to investigators and on the stand as to what happened, but to no avail. He was sentenced to only 46 months in prison last month for the assault, which took place in December 12. Police had long theorized, the same police that's under the commissioner, Burke, that Gilbert had fled a client's house along Gilgo Beach in May 2010 in a drug-induced stupor before getting lost in a marsh and dying. That was proven to be false, however, when her body was discovered and showed signs of strangulation. At the time, it had been... Now, here's where it gets interesting. They believe that the murderer pursued Gilbert along the beach as she frantically knocked on doors and made phone calls before she was killed and her body was dumped. So, family, when I saw this on the news, it was like a less than a minute story. And they glazed over that shit so fast. And then when I started digging, I started unfolding. I was like, this is why the ancestors showed me this. This is why the ancestors wanted me to tell you, because this shit is crazy. If they did this to a white man, that's the only reason why they got caught. That's the only reason why they go to jail. It's because the person that they beat up and set up and continuously went after was a white man. Because had that been one of us, they just continued to sweep it under the rug. So this is what we're trying to show you guys.
As far as me being scared of the SCPD, yeah, I'm
29-year-old Christopher Loeb said on Monday about former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke, or at least people sympathetic to the recently retired chief of one of the country's largest departments, may have physically attacked Loeb, even though the chief is in federal lockup. A variety of trusted Pix 11 news sources who have been in contact with Loeb in the last 24 hours confirm that at least twice since Monday, when Loeb spoke out for the first time, he's been physically attacked. After one of the attacks, he had to have outpatient surgery, according to sources. On Monday, Loeb spoke publicly about the alleged torture he endured 3 years ago, and now Pix 11 News has learned somebody has beaten Loeb again. Could it be somebody connected to Chief Burke? That's not yet clear. But when a federal judge ruled that Burke should get no bail after the chief's arrest last week on civil rights and conspiracy charges, the judge warned that Burke could have extensive influence both in custody and out. The man whose testimony led to Burke's arrest agrees, but he's trying to stay strong.
I'm afraid, but I'm not running. I'm following this through. I'm cooperating with federal authorities, and I'm seeking this out to the end.